Bombshell Brunches, where your hosts Raquel Rudenberg and Christina Lau sip and spill with badass babes every Tuesday morning.
Good morning. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. I am so excited to introduce you to Jen Murtagh. Have I said that correctly?
Absolutely. Nailed it.
Yeah. So Jen is an award-winning C-suite executive with 20 years of experience leading organizations in both corporate and nonprofit. She prides herself on being a connector and a community champion. Yay, snap, same. She has been recognized as one of Business in Vancouver's 40 Under 40 and is a recipient of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade Women of Promise Award. She coaches female leaders to live and lead bravely so that they can create meaningful impact and design a life they love without burning out in the process. My goodness, burnout is just the recurring theme of life. And I am now so looking forward to you fixing us both and everyone who's listening. So whenever you're ready, we'll just wait here. Let's start with your background, Jen. It's really nice to have you on the show. Tell us about you. Tell us where you came from, how you grew up. Just give us everything. Empty your everything.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say my story is unique in any sort of way in terms of how I grew up. I grew up in Richmond, British Columbia, which is a suburb of Vancouver, BC. I am first generation Canadian. My parents are both from Ireland, and all of my family are still there. And that's my spiritual home. I find it very much so, and I miss going there. And I grew up in Vancouver. I had a pretty, linear path, went to high school, went to university, ended up going to Australia for university because I wanted to spread my wings a little bit.
Oh, whereabouts?
In Melbourne, primarily.
Which university?
La Trobe University.
I went to RMIT.
Oh, I did. Okay, there we go. We're just finding out new things. So I lived there for 2 years, and I came back 3 weeks after 9/11. Actually, no, it was about a month because I had to, they just grounded all the flights. I was supposed to leave, so then my flight got delayed. So I had these big dreams of starting in hotel management, and all the hotels were on hiring freezes. So at that point, that was my first, okay, what am I doing with my life? Everything I just went to school for, I'm not going to be able to do. And then I worked for hospitality, a global hospitality company that actually did feasibility studies for hotels and where they were being built. And my career sort of unfolded from there. I worked for an organization called IntraWest in strategic partnerships and marketing. And then came along my first dream job, which was the marketing department at the Vancouver Canucks. I was a huge sports fan growing up, probably because my older brother influenced that. And that was really where I started to develop an understanding of what I wanted to do with my life and the impact I wanted to make as a leader. I had 2 children. During my first maternity leave, I had, just a massive identity crisis, and realized so much of my worth was being accessed through my role that I didn't really know who I was beyond my job. And I did a lot of soul searching during that year and decided to move into nonprofit leadership, where I stayed for the next 10 years. Until I made my most recent leap in the last 2 years to running my own consulting and coaching firm. I got to a point in my career where I didn't want to work 70 hours a week anymore, and all the racing and the kids, and it was just all too much. And I got to a place where I was totally burnt out. And so I decided to redesign my life and let my soul guide me a little bit more, rather than that feeling of survival work, moving more in alignment with my soul work. And it's taken off from there.
Oh, the statement that I was scrambling to write down was, so much of my worth was being accessed by my role.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Can you just tell me that again? Tell me what you mean by that. What did that feel like?
Yeah, I think my identity was really tied into my doing. So my identity was really tied into my achievements and my accomplishments and all the things that I was doing at work. That's how I accessed a lot of my self-worth. And that was all quite stripped away when I went on maternity leave, because then I was, just a mother. And I realized I had no idea who I was. And I realized I had a lot of inner work to do. And that began sort of the path of personal development and self-awareness work. But, they kind of say life will keep serving you the same lessons until you actually really learn them.
Oh, yes.
And I think a lot of women, I'm not unlike a lot of high achieving women that accesses a lot of their worth through their doing. And I didn't actually really know who I was in my being. And so I never made time for that. I measured a lot of my life on my productivity, not on just the fact that, I exist as a human. And that in itself makes me worthy of love and belonging.
What? I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't know that feeling at all. Raquel doesn't know that feeling at all.
So you talk about on your website, and I thought this was so incredible. You talk about leaving a marriage in search of big love. And I'm assuming this has something to do with your soul searching and starting to live a little bit more intuitively. So can you talk about that, how you came to that decision? What was the point and how did it feel to actually make that decision? I mean, going through that process is a whole thing of itself, which I think people can probably guess. But
yeah,
how do you get to that point where you make such a big decision for yourself, knowing in your heart of hearts that that's the best thing for you to do?
Yeah. One of the best quotes I've ever heard is that 100% of your intuition is fully developed, but your ability to trust it isn't.
Who said that quote?
I think it was Claire Zammit. She runs a worldwide personal development company called Evolving Wisdom, and I took one of her courses, Feminine Power, which was a very transformational course.
Ooh.
And so I'm pretty sure it was her because that's how I heard it through. But she could have pulled it from somebody else, so don't quote me on it.
I'll do some digging.
But it is one of my favorite quotes because the minute I heard the quote, I just it hit me in the gut. How many times I just felt in my life like I was in the wrong life. And I think really early on in my relationship, I knew the relationship wasn't going to last. But I kept talking myself out of it, saying, this is natural and this is normal and you just need to do this. And then I would just put my head down and work, go to therapy, counseling on and off for 5 years, have a baby, realize, this is really not working. Then things get better again. And then, just come to a place where you're like, I need to actually start listening to myself because my intuition is telling me I am not in the life I am meant to be in. And that was, that kind of brings you to your knees because, it's just the unraveling and then the discovery. And I'm like, what is the life I'm supposed to be in? I think I always knew intuitively that I was meant to be in this bigger love story. And it just wasn't it wasn't being reflected back to me in my marriage. Despite trying for many, many years, we were together for 13 years. And so, it takes a lot of bravery. And I talk about that a lot. It's tiny steps of bravery in pursuit of getting more aligned with what you're feeling, that yearning, that deeper desire that you can kind of hear and feel, but sometimes you just don't know. Gosh, what am I do next?
I just want to jump in there because there's a bit, I feel like from my perspective and from my conversations with a lot of people, there's so much to justifying. And I have found that sometimes if my guides, my gut guides, my ancestors and all the people that are just crowded around me all the time, in a good way, thanks everybody. If I don't listen well, I can't tell the difference between me justifying my delusions of grandeur, which are very alive and well, and my intuition. So how did you get to a point and what did you do to get to a stage where you knew that was your intuition speaking? Because I think and I know that that's a very difficult question and it will be different for everybody. but I almost want to, for me, I go walking, I go with the wind. I do a go with the wind Sundays so that there's enough space that my brain is empty. And that helps me to just set the intention that I'm listening and not doing. What are some of the things that you did in the lead up that you could say, yeah, these were kind of exercises that brought out my intuition?
Yeah, I stopped all the doing. So, because when you're in the doing, you can't hear properly. So I started to very intentionally create time to just listen.
Yeah.
I gave it over. To me, I gave it over to God, but people can give it over to the universe or a higher power or wherever they feel maybe that spiritual pull. I just said, I don't know what to do here. Help show me the path. Help make me take the brave decisions that are meant here. So I kind of gave it over and I gave up. And then slowly but surely, things just started to come to me, you need to do this and you need to do that and say that and keep taking a step forward and another step forward. And so I broke it down, not in like the big, I didn't really know, So we started with, at the time, a trial separation because that seemed a little easier. And so that was kind of step one. And then another step emerged. So I think intuitively, that's what happens for people. I think the overwhelm comes in when you're like, I don't know where this is leading to. You don't actually need to know to take the first step.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know if anyone else is like this, but I know when I was younger, I felt that my intuition was emotional. And there was kind of this faux pas of being emotional. And so I was always trying to logic my way through things that I knew. And I was always combating my intuition. And then I would kick myself after because I'd be like, I knew this from minute one. I read this perfectly. Why do I keep doing this? And then eventually it took me probably far too long to actually realize this. But I did eventually say, hey, emotions are kind of good and intuition is kind of good. What happens if I just start listening? What's going to really happen? I mean, I could be wrong, but then
what's the worst that could happen? I mean, bad things can happen, but
and that's a beautiful way to more deeply align with your feminine power, because I think a lot of women, and I certainly was one of these women for a very long time, was that I was all masculine power. I was all about control and titles, and not control in a bad way, but trying to grip my life in a very firm way, not controlling of people. Success for me was the corner office and the nicer car and the bigger home and the title. And, it showed up in bank accounts and all of those kinds of things. And so I really disconnected from my feminine power, which is much more connected to self, to others. Feminine power is much more open. It's much more receptive. It's nonlinear. It is creative and curious. And in order to anchor into that feminine power, you have to be anchored into your body wisdom. There's no other way. And so when I started to actually begin a practice to try and anchor more back into that feminine power, the path became so clear.
Can I interject here and I just want you to, I'm going to send you Ocean Bloom's podcast and website, because we spoke to, you just mentioned something that I think is really, really worth highlighting, is reconnecting to your body wisdom. And Ocean is, she's a personal trainer. She does 6 different forms of alternative healing and trauma release therapy, and has worked with everyone from the Beckhams to Kate Moss. She lives in Vancouver now, and she is an incredible person that we are friends with now because of, I actually took some of her incredible treatments, and that body wisdom, it can be, we can disconnect so easily from our minds, hearts, and guts. And I think those 3 centers, when they're not in alignment, there are just so many issues that kind of pop up. And it's sad that we've had to grow up in a very masculine side heavy world for the most part, where we are anyway in this side of the world, that it becomes normal. So Raquel, when you were talking about it, when you were like, oh, why did I lose that? Because everything in the world is telling you to, and everything in the world is telling you it's not important. I had a conversation with someone the other day, and they were like, you shouldn't care about the titles. And I was like, yeah. And I'm really looking forward to the day that I don't have to.
Yeah, and masculine power is not a bad thing, and I don't want to say that it is. It's just troublesome for women when they operate 100% from it.
I think it's troublesome for anyone operating 100% from either of those things. I think recognizing the two. I mean, I'm Chinese. It's yin and yang. It's however you want to, put that. It's the dragon and the phoenix, and I just think that I'm really optimistic and hopeful that we're going to move into a realm with people like you, thanks to people like you. And Raquel, I'm just the talkative observer.
No.
But people like you who move things forward and help people to kind of shape and identify and represent what people can become, which I think is a really brave thing to do. So with this big love, can I just before we I just want to hear a little bit more about it. What happened? Tell us.
Well, yeah, I mean, I walked away from my marriage and in a way that we both were aligned, and, our kids were 2 and 5, so that wasn't easy. And then, I kind of did what most women do. I closed myself off to love. I decided I was never going to marry again, all the stories. And I spent a lot of time healing and a lot of time discovering and a lot of time opening before I decided, you know what? I'm kind of lonely. Maybe I'll just go date. And I did that. And I met my husband on my 3rd date.
It's always how it goes. It's always how it goes.
I was like, I kind of would have liked to have just, maybe played the field a little bit, because it had been so long since I was out there. But I mean, he was just the most wonderful man I'd ever met. I never wanted to let him go once I met him. And so, yeah, our courtship began. And he was also divorced with 2 kids. And our lives came together and we moved in. It took a while. It was over 2 years before we moved in together, because that's a big decision when you have 4 children. Mm-hmm. And then we got married shortly after on a beach in Maui. We surprised our friends that we were there with on spring break. We said, that dinner tomorrow night we're doing? Well, we're actually getting married. So that was really fun. And we didn't tell the kids until 2 days before we went either.
Oh, wow.
And it's been really beautiful. I truly believe our souls were meant to be together, that, we both have a lot of growth still to do, and we're marrying that back to ourselves. And the love is unlike anything I ever would have dreamed of. It is the thing that I remember, when I was in my old story, was like, there's something else.
I love that.
Yeah. And I
love that.
Yeah.
Wait, did you guys know when you went to Maui that you were going to get married?
Was
it surprise? Okay.
Come on, I'm a girl. I wanted the nice dress and the flower crown and
I can't walk out with wearing a paper bag and being like, yeah, this'll do.
That's incredible. I love that story. I want to surprise marry people. I mean, surprise.
I want to surprise marry people.
Marriage. Jean, take notes. I'd like to know first, but
That's not oh, right. Oh, yes. Right. You want to surprise marry with other people. Not. No.
Yeah. We'll surprise them.
Well, I think it was this Elizabeth Gilbert quote, and I'll probably bastardize the quote a little bit, but she essentially says there's huge swaths of women who need to remember that their lives belong to them.
Oh.
And I remember reading that quote and thinking, what service am I really doing here by staying in this unhappiness? Because I was raised Catholic, Vatican I Catholic. And so divorce was your soul's going to hell, basically.
Yeah, not on the table.
And I had young kids, and there was so much guilt wrapped up in that. And I just remember, I'm going to create happiness in my life. And if my kids see a mother who's vibrant and joyful and happy, then their lives will be better for it.
Oh,
Our lives belong to us.
I love that. I'm just going to write that down.
She's noting all her quotes.
I have a book of quotes. It is a book. It is a good book. Okay.
So as Christina writes down these fabulous quotes, I want to ask you about asking the hard questions. And it was quite funny because I was reading something you wrote about asking the hard questions of yourself and others. And we had just posted a quote on our Instagram page about having the tough conversations and how important those are. And I think asking the hard questions is kind of like having those hard conversations with yourself. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Why that's your path, how you have those conversations, and how you can keep them moving forward?
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be different for everybody. But I have always had this deep feeling, whether it's true or not, and sometimes it makes me well up just thinking about it. But I've always had this feeling like I'm not going to have a really long life. And so I think that feeling has driven a lot of my deep desire for purpose and impact and self-actualization, because I feel like I don't have time to waste. And there's no evidence to support this. It's just some sort of feeling. And so I believe, like, I've always kind of asked myself the hard questions, which are often like, who do I want to be in this? You know, what's the impact I'm really desiring to make here? Where's my soul calling me? What am I deeply desiring to create or to express or to contribute to? You know, if I was to leave this world, what would I want people to say about me? I remember reading David Brooks, one of his book called The Second Mountain. And the notion was, the first mountain is kind of like what you think life's going to be, and you're going to reach all these things, and then you're going to feel happy. And then you get to the top of that first mountain and you're like, well, this sucks. I don't feel anything. And some people get thrown off their first mountain by disease or cancer or, a death in the family or something like that makes them rethink all of these things. And some people reach the first top and they say, oh yeah, I don't want to be here. And the second mountain is more about that like connection to deeper purpose and redefining what success means on your terms. And so I think that I did reach that first mountain kind of maybe earlier on in my life, and I felt, kind of empty. And so those are some of the hard questions that I've asked myself, like, what's my second mountain? And he talks a lot about eulogy virtues versus resume virtues. And I've always thought about, gosh, I don't want people to say, oh, you know what? She always worked a solid 80-hour week. She had all these great awards, or like, I would want them to say like who I was. Jen was, showed up when I needed her. She saw who I was and helped me remember that. Like, I just would think about like more of the eulogy virtues, like things that I would want people to say about the impact that I left when I leave this earth. And so I think that's forced me to continually ask myself the hard questions and to unravel the validity of some of those old stories I told myself. And for a really long time, the story was, you can't make it on your own. Who's going to pay you? What would you do? You can't work 40 hours a week and make that kind of money and be able to pick up your kids. That doesn't exist. And when I believed those old stories, it kept me trapped in that story. It wasn't until I started to question the validity of some of those old stories and allowed myself to get curious and more receptive and open about, I wonder how this could evolve. I wonder what I could be doing where I'm making this kind of money, which is facilitating this kind of lifestyle, where I cannot be exhausted all the time, where I can be a more present and loving mother, where I have, God forbid, time for myself. And so, I think that's just been a continued path for me. I think everyone needs to be asking themselves the hard questions, especially over the last year, like if that's taught us anything.
I just want to wrap this back into your coaching. So can you walk me through, you have a client, what do you do with them?
Well, it really depends on the client, but we do initial discovery on how they want what they want to utilize coaching for. What are the challenges that they're facing? What are they coming up against? What are some of the old stories? What are the inner critic messages? How could they play a bit bigger? And so it really depends on the goal of the client in terms of what they want to accomplish.
So can I paint you a profile of who I think we have a lot of our listeners, right? And then, if you were to say, okay, I would do like a 12-week, this is what I would kind of walk you through. These are the concepts that I'd maybe walk you through. Just for the sake of, I'm a really, really big fan of coaching. And I think that it's really important for people to find ways, if they can't afford ways to begin with, to find resources to help set them up for when they can afford ways. So I just want to walk us through that. So typical audience profile, I think, are really ambitious, kind of, I would say in the mid of their careers. Some are at the start of their careers, but they're really passionate, very highly skilled, often questioning whether they're doing the right thing. There's a little bit of that imposter syndrome, I think, with a lot of people. We have a lot of very entrepreneurial people who are not intending to be entrepreneurial. And so there's, again, that imposter syndrome of, am I doing this right? Where do I find the resources? And then I think a lot, I'll say this for myself because I just want this piece too, but that feeling, that limiting belief of not being able to have it all. So actually stopping myself before I even say it. So I would say to you, oh yeah, I'd really like to own a house, instead of I want a 7-bedroom mansion with someone else and multiple people to clean it, and a personal chef and a private martial arts instructor. Not that I have thought about this before in any specific way. So that, I think that's our audience, but they're kind of, they know that they are destined for that bigger thing. How would you walk them through?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's sort of my sweet spot. So I love women that are in transition or potentially transition, who are really desiring to self-actualize is what I kind of say. And I mean, I get all kinds of clients currently that I'm working with right now. But what I would normally do is, most coaching sessions are very non-directive and curious. And I truly believe you can't become yourself by yourself. Like, we need people on our team reflecting back to us, because it's really hard to do this kind of work in isolation. So what I would do in that regard is, usually start getting some clarity. So what's most important to this person right now? If they were to believe it was possible, what would they want to see in their lives? Where are the biggest gaps? We'd also look at their core values, their zone of genius, really getting a lot of data.
What's the zone of genius?
Oh, so, okay. Well, zone of genius, it's also kind of sometimes described as survival work, soul work. But there's a book by Gay Hendricks, sold millions of copies, called The Big Leap. And essentially he gets into what I truly believe is this framework around, there's zone of excellence and zone of genius. And so zone of excellence work is really the work that you do that people would pay you to do. So you have a demonstrated track record of success in that. For me, that was maybe fundraising and leadership. It's survival work. It's what people will pay you to do to facilitate your life so you can pay your mortgage and do all the things. But that work doesn't necessarily light you up. It doesn't necessarily expand your soul. There might be some aspects of it. And so then there's zone of genius. And zone of genius is really that work that it comes very naturally to you. There's something like your innate talents and gifts. It's things that you don't even understand why it's hard for other people. It's the stuff you're doing that you feel lit up in, that when you are in, you get into kind of a flow. And there's like maybe a vibrational shift for you when you're working in it. And so the idea is discovering, like, what is that for people? Because most people spend all that time in their survival work, in their zone of excellence. And when women are looking to make a shift, sometimes they just go out there and look at, well, what have I done to date? And like, where could I fit myself into? Rather than starting from a place of clarity. No, actually, what's most important to you right now? Mm-hmm. What is the work that you are doing that you really notice that you have a strength in? It comes very easily to you. You also might have a background in it, but maybe not. Like sometimes there's different strengths and experience you need to cultivate. And for me, that was coaching. If I look back through all of my career, the one common thread about all the things I loved the most was leading a team, was connecting with my team one-on-one, was growing my team, was mentoring my team, was coaching my team. I was coaching for 20 years before I started work as an actual coach. And so once I got clarity on that, I thought, oh, isn't that interesting? Yeah, I wonder if I could do that for a living. And then it just really started to unfold from there. But I had to cultivate that gift more. I took some coach training. I'm continually investing in myself and my own growth. As I expand, I give the ability for my clients to expand even more deeply. And so that's kind of zone of excellence, zone of genius. And it's also sometimes described as survival work, soul work. So how do you make the leap between your survival work into your soul work? And when you're in that, like, it's nothing but up. I mean, it's hard. It's not like all of a sudden things start coming so easily. There's work behind it as well, but it doesn't often feel like heavy work. So that's a little bit about that.
I love that. And I think I wanted to kind of weigh in and add to it just from a career pathway perspective in my own development of the programs that I'm building. One of the things that I like to I call it the two faders. And one of them, and it's building on top of that same kind of concept, but you have two faders on a mixing desk. And I made this analogy for my wonderful, darling engineering graduates who are audio engineers and producers. You have two faders. One is your human meatbag citizen of the world fader, which is your contribution to society, leaving the world better than you found it, the legacy, or however you want to describe that. And then you have your soul's ascension, and you have that, leaving the world a better soul than you started, having learned all of these wonderful things. When I've done my career coaching, what I've realized is my human meatbag citizen of the world fader can go up. If it goes up too high for too long at the expense of the other, then, you become that person on Greenpeace ships, suffering for the cause, and it's literally suffering for the cause, and your soul doesn't ascend. And if you push the other fader up way too much, you become, a self-sustaining human sitting on an island by themselves, not contributing to the world at all. Mm-hmm. And I think the really interesting thing with to loop that into what you're talking about, I call it metric hunting, the track record one, the kind of, what did you call it? The bankable.
Oh, sorry.
The survival work. Survival. Yeah. So the survival work, the things that you go metric hunting for, I think it's really important to know where those two faders are at any point in your life, because you can push up those metric hunting things. And I call them stepping stone jobs, when people are like, this is what I get paid the most to do, and what my skill set is, but this is what I really love. And transitioning, it isn't always, I don't think it always works where you try and make a leap. I think what works is when you fall in love with your process of bridging those two things and riding the two faders.
I love that. I love that analogy. And for me, when I made that little leap, I stayed in my zone of excellence. Like I was consulting, but I decided I'm not going to consult like 40 or 50 hours a week. I can consult this amount of time, so that can facilitate some time for me to explore more of my soul work.
Yes.
Yeah. It's not like, unless you have a really big financial cushion where you can be like, oh, I'm taking the leap and I'm just going to stop cash flow coming in, and I'm good. Like there's other alternatives to doing this, to exploring it, to just giving yourself permission to be curious.
Yeah. And creating that space. I love that what it sounds like you do with your coaching is you help people to create the space to find themselves.
Mm-hmm. The curiosity piece, is very underrated. And it's how I found my path. And it also, it takes a lot of compassion. If you don't love yourself fiercely through that journey, you'll never get through it. And it takes community. All opportunities happen through a matrix of relationships. But so many women are stuck in these old stories about receiving. I don't want to ask for help. I don't want to put it out there. That'll make it look like I don't know what I'm doing. Or then, I'm a burden to other people. That it's like all these old stories we're holding on to about receiving. So getting into an empowered relationship of what it means to receive. Because I don't know about you, but all the women I know have no problem giving.
Ugh.
No problem. And I just think about how much you've amassed in your bank account around giving. What if you could approach receiving in the same way? What would that shift for you in your life?
Yeah. And I think the relationship portion is so important. And I think it's really downplayed because I hear in so many movies and so many high achieving podcasts that I listen to, specifically ones run by men, which I love them clearly because I'm listening to them. But at the same time, there's a lot of this talk about how everyone around you says it's not possible and turn that into fuel and all of this stuff. And that's a great concept, but I think that's really, really difficult, especially for women. It's so important to have someone, even if it's just one person behind you who says, you know what? That's fucking exciting. Good for you. Go for it. Or why not just try it? What's the worst that's going to happen? We're here. We'll be here for you.
Yeah, Raquel, that's why you built Bombshell Brunches.
We built, but
well, you built it on that premise. I had nefarious intentions, which will come to light at some point when I develop my way to become Magneto. But
and that's the willingness to take imperfect action.
Yeah.
And that's not like a lot of women polishing, over preparation, hiding behind the whiteboard. It needs to be all of these things in order for me to take that first step. So that's what I love, that willingness to take imperfect action. What's one thing you can do in pursuit of that? How can your self-talk and your actions be aligned with that greater vision that you have?
Okay. I have to jump because there's so many places I want to go with this conversation we're having right now, but then I'm going to lose out on other things I want to talk to you about. So, I want to talk about leadership as a woman. And you were speaking earlier about how you've been coaching for 20 years by being a leader. You were leading a team and all of that. And I think that's something that I've seen a lot of people have difficulty with, or a lot of women specifically have difficulty with, and I've had difficulty with, is leading authentically. And I was just reading an article recently on this, and I've talked to Christine about this, and she's an amazing sounding board for me because I have a very specific personality. And I find that as soon as I kick into what I think people want me to be as a leader, it really negates any leadership capabilities that I have. I think that I do come off ingenuine, when the reality is, if I were just to sit back and be the authentic leader that I can be, I think it would go so much better. But that's very difficult because as a woman, I want to appease people by leading in the way that they want me to lead. So how did you navigate that? And then how do you coach women who are leaders to navigate that?
Yeah, I think it's important to know that we are wired to please. So women are biologically wired. For thousands of years, we were dependent upon others for survival. Women did not survive by themselves on their own. I don't know, maybe last 100 years, really on their own. So there is a biological wiring that we all have in our systems that is not too far removed, that makes us more conscious of, what do people think? Oh, did I come across this way? Or, oh, I want to agree with that. But so we're wired to be accommodating and to be shifting and to be pleasing. So I think that's really important to know. Layered onto that is media, the way women are socialized, commercialized. And then we walk into this leadership realm, which, it shouldn't be, but, from an unconscious bias perspective, it would show that leadership is more affiliated with men, and so there's bias against that. So when women are in, in a more masculine dominated area, our inner critic's going to be a lot louder too. And so there is research to show that our inner critic gets louder when we're in areas that are more associated with the masculine. So that's a lot to play with before we get in. So even having some of that awareness around like what's driving that is really powerful to have, because then you can start getting really curious and aware about how you're showing up. And so I think for me, I started to ask myself the question of, what's more important to me than praise and validation? Like, who do I want to be in this? If I'm going to be a values-based leader, what are my values and how do I lead in according with those, rather than how I think people want me to be? An important thing for women to also realize, though, is that women are very judged on their warmth. And as much as I hate it, the research will show that the more powerful a woman is, the less likely she is to be liked. And so we have to consider that, the warmth and the confidence and the competence, having kind of both. And so, for me, I just started asking myself, like, what's more important to me than praise and validation? Like, Tara Moore talks about this in her Playing Big book, and it's about unhooking from that praise and validation and learning that as we rise as women, we are ultimately going to face criticism. If you just, pick your favorite book, go on to Amazon, read the reviews, read the 1-star reviews, read the 5-star reviews. Like, the more you stretch and grow, the more you do open yourself up to criticism. So that requires a lot of personal work around, like, what's more important to me than praise and validation? A lot of women will tell me it's the impact I want to make. Okay, so how do you not let the inner critic telling you to shut up in that meeting, or you don't know what you're talking about, or you're just lucky to be here, or it's only a matter of time someone finds you out? How do you not let that impact the actions you take? What value could you place in the lead instead? One of my deep core values is curiosity. So if I shift out of fear and into curiosity, that gives me a little bit more power.
I think the curiosity is the big key.
Yeah, I do as well. And I think that's a perfect segue into talking about communicating with power. If we roll back to being in those boardrooms, like you were just talking about, I know you've done videos on this topic, which is, I love your videos on it. So anyone who's listening, please find them because they're great. We'll link them below. But if you can talk a little bit about how women can communicate with power, how can they find that?
Yeah. So for me, I always think about, like, from an intention perspective, how do I want to be perceived? Can I pick 3 words before I maybe head into a meeting? Okay, I want to be engaging. I want to be trustworthy. I want to be knowledgeable. So I start to think of, how do I really want to show up in this meeting from an intention perspective? And then what am I going to need to do in order to indicate those things? What I see what a lot of women do is that they let their self-doubt leak into their communication, whether that be written or verbal. And here's the thing, I think we have to normalize self-doubt. Like, there's this notion that, women are going to have this never failing, glorious confidence. And I just don't believe that. I think that the more you stretch, the more you grow, the more self-doubt you're going to feel. And I coach VPs, CEOs, founders, right down to women who are just starting their career. And they all have a similar voice. They all have an inner critic voice. So, confidence is really a self-assessment. You might think I'm really confident, but I might feel a lot of self-doubt. I just don't let it leak into my communication. And so what a lot of women do, and this is primarily out of, habit or trying to be more likable, strategic softening, is they say things like, I just have something to add here. Or, I actually disagree instead of I disagree. Or, this might be a bad idea, but Or am I making sense? Like we constantly are using these disqualifiers in our language, which is our self-doubt leaking into our communication. So you can have the self-doubt. Just be really mindful of not letting it leak into your communication. Don't write emails that say, I'm sorry to bother you, or I'm just checking in, or a friendly reminder. Ask for what you want, still convey warmth, make sure you feel aligned with your values, but get like really aware of how that is leaking into your communication, because people will judge you and make perceptions of you as a result of that. And yeah.
Okay. I have to dig in here because I'm terrible for strategic softening, but I do it in very specific circumstances. So I'm normally very direct. I was raised by a Dutch family, and Dutch people are very direct. So I am very direct. But what I found as I started kind of rising in the ranks and starting to do presentations or starting to head meetings and things like that is that a lot of times my male counterparts did not jive well with my directness. And it really deflated my ability to just be myself and be direct. I think that's kind of what you're talking about in terms of women being perceived as cold, and that is abrasive. And so in order to kind of combat that, I would do strategic softening. Mm-hmm. So do you have any tips for women out there who are direct or who are upfront and who are facing strategic softening? How can they become warm without nullifying the potency of what they're saying?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a hard line. Okay. And some women do it well, and some women have just given up and just say, screw this. Like, I'm not buying into this anymore, and I'm just going to show up this way. And so it's a personal decision. I think I would encourage women to explore past experiences that they might be holding on to for communicating powerfully. Because often it's like one experience. It's like, oh, that one time in that one meeting, I got this piece of feedback after, and this happened to me, where my boss said, you're a bit abrasive in that meeting. And I immediately was like, oh my goodness, I don't want to come across as abrasive. Like, that's like the worst thing you could ever say to me. So then I went to like the opposite end of the spectrum, which was like total humility, meek, strategic softening. Oh, I'm not trying to come across as like, rather than looking at that piece of feedback objectively and saying, I wonder what this piece of feedback is telling me about that person's preferences or priorities. So it's telling me that maybe he's not used to women asking for what they want. Oh yeah, like he has this kind of background. He probably didn't have a lot of women around him that were powerful. And so that's telling me a piece of information about him. So moving from that inward fixation, oh my God, I'm abrasive, to, what is this telling me about that person? And then I look through from a filter perspective, is that piece of feedback relevant to my goals and aspirations within this organization? Okay, maybe a little bit, because maybe that's going to impact my promotability in a way. Maybe there might be some truth. Maybe I was being a bit abrasive. Okay. So, the third question is, how do I, readjust my style as a result of that piece of feedback? So instead of going to like the opposite end of the spectrum, which is now I'm just this total humble, meek, like diminutive woman that doesn't ask for anything, maybe I choose to listen a little bit more instead of jumping in at every occasion possible. So like sometimes running a filter on that feedback, but also more importantly, gosh, that happened to me in my 20s. I still remember that like it was yesterday. What am I still holding on to about what it means to communicate powerfully as a woman? That one time, that one piece of feedback. How could I update that narrative?
I love that. And I wanted to add to that, just because I have this conversation with a lot of people. Establishing safety with the people that you are accepting feedback from is really important. So if you have like a good group of people around you, Like I can call Raquel and say, am I being rude? Do you think I'm being rude? In a safe way that allows me to then manage the expectation and then safely trial and error how I go through things. So I've done this over the course of my life as well, because I do have I am very direct, and I didn't necessarily soften at all. What I did was find a safe group of people who could privately speak to me afterwards and give feedback and context that I would then look at and say, okay, is this relevant? Just like you said, with this, checking the filters of the people. And I remember having a conversation with one of my favorite people and mentors who was like, when you're angry, this is what happens, and people respond in this way. And I was furious that he said it. And then of course I got angry about it. But the fact that we'd established so much safety meant that I could then grow from it and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I was angry because I'm so sick of not getting heard. And it became a dialogue, because then he turned around and said, oh, okay, how would you feel better being heard? Do I need to set it up for you next time so that if you have something to say, I express my support more verbally? Will that help you? And it became that dialogue with whoever you were around. And I think actually a lot of people in business as well, they're happy to help support you if you know how to articulate how you want to be supported.
Beautifully said. Yeah.
And I think that that's I want to also just really quickly shift. I know that we talk about women a lot in this, but there are so many men, there are so many people, just human beings I know, that are feeling all of the same things that you're talking about. So I think it's really important to add that, whatever your gender identity is, however you've grown up, however you've lived, however you feel, these are real barriers, that can stop you from being the best version of yourself. Mm-hmm. But I think that's such a wonderful way of breaking it down, moving from inward fixation to outward. I loved that last piece that you said as well in that. We don't have a ton of time with us today, but we want more. So of course we would love to have you come back. But I do actually have a question about mining your purpose. This phrase of mining your purpose. We see a lot of like real powerhouse people doing big things and knowing what they want to do. But I had this conversation on Clubhouse yesterday, doing a career pathway talk, and someone said, well, what if I don't know what my purpose is? What if I don't know? I mean, we started Bombshell Brunches and we're constantly asking that question of ourselves. So how do you help somebody go about mining their purpose?
Yeah. Well, I kind of touched upon a few of the things earlier. So I would start by collecting a little bit of data on understanding more about the individual. Mm-hmm. Their innate gifts and strengths, and learning more about their values, the times in their life where they felt totally lit up and, more aligned with their being. And so we would very curiously look at a lot of different data set points to start. And I believe that purpose, really evolves for people, and that, sometimes you're called, you have multiple callings in your lives. And I would say, for me, I've always felt this deep sense of purpose around that I wanted to make an impact in whatever I was doing. Mm-hmm. And that's, kind of changed and evolved as I have. And so I would encourage people to not think like you might have just one purpose in your life. You might have multiple feelings of, different things that you are called to. And so I think it's like being able to honor that. If someone tells me like, I don't know what my purpose is, I'm just trying all these different things, that's okay too. That's giving you information and data about like what you loved, what you never want to do again. And I think slowly but surely, the more you can be actually connected with yourself. I think so many people are so disconnected from this feeling of purpose because they're 99.9% in the doing. There is no stillness time. There is no being. There is no self-inquiry. There is no receptivity. There is no like connection between the head and the heart. They're just cut off, severed from the head up in the doing, expecting, oh, my purpose, it should just come to me. Like it just doesn't work that way. If you're cut off from the whispers that you know, kind of are hearing in your life, it tells me you're not listening. You're not listening to your body. You're not honoring the body wisdom as much as in the thinking. So for me, you know, evolving more in my purpose has been dropping out of my head and into my heart and asking myself some of those bigger questions. You know, a lot of people don't even give themselves time to reflect upon that. They think it's just going to be served up to them. So, you know, that's a roundabout answer. I mean, I love what, you know, the Okinawans talk about, and they call it ikigai, which essentially translates into like the reason you wake up every morning. And there's, you know, there's huge research to show them more tied to like a purpose you have. And it can be beyond what you do for, you know, your job. But having a deeper sense of purpose will show that you know, the research would show you'll have a longer life as well. So, you know, just like letting yourself start to be curious and open and receptive. Where are you being called? What's your relationship been like with your callings? Have you denied them? Have they been fearful? Have you told them that, you know? So yeah, that would really tell me. People that have no idea about what they want to do in their lives are probably a lot of the times in their doing and not spending a lot of time in their being and listening. So that requires a, you know, different set of tools.
I think that is the perfect way to wrap up and go full circle from where we started. Jen, thank you so much. Tell me how people can best find you. I know you're active on Instagram and LinkedIn.
Thanks, Christina. And thank you so much, Raquel. This has been such a beautiful and meaningful experience for me as well. My website's jenmurtagh.com, and Murtagh is Murtagh. And I'm on Instagram, Jen Murtagh Coaching. I'm always open to LinkedIn connections. I'm a pretty active user there. So between those three ways, you can absolutely find me if you want to connect for any reason.
Amazing. And you have a variety of different kind of, is it individual coaching? Do you do group coaching as well? Do you do workshops as well?
Yeah, I do one-on-one coaching. I do group coaching. I do workshops. I'm going to be launching a new business in the fall that supports women navigating from maternity leave.
Ooh, cool.
Time off. So yeah, there's lots of different opportunities.
Let's come back when you're going to do that. When you're going to launch that, we'd love to have another chat and just be really specific about, I can see Raquel's like thoughts flying out of her brain right now from across
I've got a lineup in mind.
Oh.
I'm pre-planning this.
Well, thank you so much. You've just been absolutely incredible. I have almost a full book of quotes that I'm sure are going to be popping up on our social media. So for those of you who are listening, don't forget to follow us on Instagram. We're at Bombshell Brunches, and like and rate all the things in all of the places. We do love good feedback. And, you know, if you're going to do bad feedback, then just send us an email so that we can respond directly and no one else will see, so that we can continue to be safe in our failures that are not failures. They're just growth opportunities. Okay, darlings? Thank you so much again, Jen. We will see you very soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, Bombshells. In order to continue to elevate, subscribe and don't forget to click that little bell so you can get notified every time we have a new badass brunch. Until next time, stay focused, fierce, and fabulous.